The sun had not yet risen when Chief Lakota heard the horses. He was already awake. He had barely slept in 3 days. The weight of leadership had a way of pressing down on a man's chest like a stone, heavy at night, when the fires burned low and the elders whispered in the dark about war, about vengeance, about the blood that had to be paid with blood. Lakota sat at the entrance of his teepee, his buffalo robe pulled tight around his shoulders, his eyes fixed on the eastern hills where the sky was just beginning to shift from black to a deep and bruised purple. He breathed slowly. He had learned long ago that breathing was the one thing a man could always control, even when everything else was burning down around him. The hooves grew louder. 3 riders. He knew by the sound, not the heavy thunder of enemy soldiers, but the sharp, urgent rhythm of his own scouts returning from the tree line. They came fast, which meant the news was not good. It never was, these days. Runner, his youngest scout and a boy of barely 17 winters, leaped from his horse before it had fully stopped. His face was streaked with dust and something else, fear, maybe, or the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from seeing something a man cannot unsee. He dropped to one knee in front of Lakota and pressed his fist to his chest. 3 soldiers, Runner said, breathing hard. Separated from their regiment. They rode into the valley near Crow Creek. They burned Lame Elk's family camp. He paused. His jaw was tight. Lame Elk's wife is dead. His daughter, she is taken. The camp stirred behind Lakota. He had not moved, but he felt the weight of every man and woman who had heard those words settle on his shoulders like snow piling on a pine branch, slow at first, and then suddenly too much to bear. Lame Elk himself appeared from the darkness between the teepees, his face a mask of stone that was barely holding together. He was a warrior who had never once shown fear in battle. But his eyes that morning were the eyes of a man standing at the edge of a cliff he had not chosen to climb. "Give me 10 men, Lame Elk said. His voice was quiet. That was the most frightening kind of anger, quiet, certain, already decided. Lakota looked at him for a long time. He thought about what it would mean to say yes. The 3 soldiers were part of a larger regiment, camped less than a day's ride north. If 10 Lakota warriors rode out and returned with blood on their hands and scalps on their belts, that regiment would not wait for orders from Washington. They would come with rifles and cannons and the kind of fury that governments call justified. The Lakota village numbered 212 people. Nearly half of them were children. He thought about what it would mean to say no. "How old is the daughter?" Lakota asked. 14 winters, Runner said. "Her name is Wren." Lakota closed his eyes for just one breath. Then he stood. He was not an enormous man, not the tallest warrior in the camp, not the heaviest, but when Lakota stood fully upright, something happened in the air around him. Men who had known him for 20 years said they could never quite explain it. He simply became the center of the world. "No one rides for blood," he said. "I will ride alone. I will bring Wren home." The silence that followed was the loudest thing he had ever heard. Lame Elk stared at him. Runner's mouth opened slightly. 2 of the older warriors exchanged a glance that said everything neither of them dared to speak aloud. "Alone?" Lame Elk's voice finally cracked, just barely. "They will kill you." "They might," Lakota said. "But if I take 10 warriors, they will kill all of us. And then they will come here." He let that land. He let every person in the gathering crowd hold the picture of it in their minds, the camp burning, the children running, the soldiers on horseback. "I will go with words. I will go with truth. That is the only weapon that does not cost us everything." He saddled his horse before the sun fully cleared the hills. He rode north alone into a morning that felt like the edge of a knife. The soldiers' camp sat in a shallow valley between 2 ridges of pale rock, surrounded by cottonwood trees whose leaves had already turned gold. It was, in a different world, a beautiful place. Lakota saw 3 canvas tents, a fire, 2 horses tied to a rope strung between trees, and 4 men, not 3. One more than Runner had counted. That was the kind of detail that could kill a man, and Lakota filed it away quietly as he slowed his horse to a walk and rode in from the open, his hands visible, his rifle left behind at camp. He carried only a hunting knife at his belt and a small bundle of cedar tied with red thread, which among his people meant he came in peace. The soldiers saw him before he reached the fire. Of course they did, a lone rider on a spotted horse, approaching without hurry in the early morning light. One man reached for his rifle. Another stood slowly, squinting. The third called out something in English, and the fourth, the one who had not been counted, stepped out from behind the nearest tent with a pistol already drawn. Lakota did not stop riding. He did not speed up, either. He simply continued at the same measured pace, his face calm, his eyes moving carefully from man to man, reading each of them the way a hunter reads a landscape. The one with the drawn pistol was young, maybe 20, with pale red hair and a sunburned neck. He was frightened. Frightened men with guns were the most dangerous creatures on earth, and Lakota knew this the way he knew the sound of a rattlesnake, instinctively, in the bones. He stopped his horse 10 yards from the fire and sat still for a moment. Then he climbed down slowly, deliberately, making sure every movement was visible and clear, and he walked to the edge of their camp and held up the cedar bundle. "I am Chief Lakota of the Hunkpapa Band," he said in English. His English was careful and precise. He had learned it as a young man from a missionary who had lived 3 winters among his people before the cold took him. "I have not come to fight. I have come for the girl." The man with the pistol did not lower it. But the tallest soldier, older, with gray at his temples and sergeant's stripes on his coat, took a step forward. His eyes were calculating. Not cruel, Lakota thought. Just careful. A man measuring the distance between decisions. "You speak English," the sergeant said. "I do," Lakota said. "Which is fortunate for both of us." A sound came from inside the nearest tent, a small, sharp sound, quickly swallowed, like someone pressing their hand over their own mouth. Lakota kept his face still, but every part of him sharpened at that sound. She was alive. Ren was alive and she was close. The sergeant looked at the young man with the pistol, then back at Lakota. "Your people burned one of our supply wagons 2 weeks ago," he said. 3 of my men were hurt. "And your men burned the camp of Lame Elk last night," Lakota said. "His wife is dead. She was not a soldier. She was a woman cooking a meal." He paused. "I know this because I chose not to send 20 warriors here this morning. I came instead. Because I believe there is a version of this morning that does not end with more dead." The sergeant was quiet. The young man with the pistol had not lowered it, but his arm was beginning to shake slightly, the telltale tremor of a man who has been holding a heavy thing too long without resolution. "You came alone," the sergeant said. It was not quite a question. "Yes." That was either very brave or very stupid. "My people would say those are the same thing," Lakota said, and he meant it. A sound moved through the soldiers, not quite laughter, but something close to it, something that shifted the temperature of the air between them by a few degrees. Just enough. The sergeant turned and nodded to someone behind him. The tent flap opened. And Ren came out, small, 14 years old, wearing a torn dress and holding herself with the rigid, furious dignity of someone who has decided they will not be broken no matter what. There was a cut above her eye. She saw Lakota and her chin came up. "Come," he said to her softly in Lakota. "Your father is waiting." She walked to his side without running, without tears, with her back straight. In that moment, Lakota thought she was one of the bravest people he had ever seen. He turned back to the sergeant. "This is not over between our peoples," he said. "But it does not have to continue today." The sergeant nodded once, slowly. "No," he said. "It doesn't." Lakota lifted Ren onto his horse and rode south out of that valley without looking back. He felt 4 pairs of eyes on his spine the entire way. None of them fired. He brought Ren home before noon. The reunion between father and daughter was not loud. Lame Elk caught his child in both arms and held her with the silent, shaking grip of a man who has spent a night staring into a future without her and found it completely unbearable. He did not speak for a long time. He simply held her. The camp gathered and watched, and no one said anything, because there are moments that do not need words, moments that words would only diminish. Lakota stepped back quietly. He left them to it. That was what he always did after something like this. He handed the moment to the people who owned it and walked away before anyone could thank him, because gratitude made him uncomfortable in the particular way that honest men are made uncomfortable by praise they feel they have only done their duty to earn. He walked to the river. The river that ran along the eastern edge of their camp was not wide or dramatic. It was the kind of river that moved quietly through the world, feeding the cottonwood roots and the reeds and the small brown fish that darted in the shallows. Lakota had come to this river his entire life, as a boy to catch those fish with his hands, as a young warrior to sit with his thoughts after his first battle, as a grieving son to wash his face the morning after his father was buried. The river knew him in the way that rivers know the people who keep returning to their banks. He sat on a flat stone near the water's edge and pressed his palms against his thighs and breathed. He was tired in a way that sleep would not fix, a tiredness that lived inside the chest rather than in the muscles. He had been carrying the lives of 200 people for 6 years, since the council had named him chief at 31, and sometimes the weight of that made him feel very old in a very young body. He heard footsteps behind him. Light ones. He did not turn. "You should eat something," said a woman's voice. He turned then. She was standing a few feet away, holding a small clay bowl with both hands. She was perhaps 28, with dark eyes that held an unusual quality. They were not soft eyes, exactly, but they were not hard, either. They were the eyes of someone who had seen difficult things and had chosen, deliberately and daily, not to let those things make her bitter. She had a wide mouth and hair braided over one shoulder, and she wore a beaded necklace that Lakota recognized as the work of the women from the Eastern Band, which meant she was not from this camp originally. "I know who you are," he said. "Everyone knows who you are," she said. She walked forward and held out the bowl. "That does not mean you should skip meals." He took the bowl. It was warm rabbit stew with wild onion, and the smell of it hit him hard in the stomach in a way that reminded him he had not eaten since the previous evening. He looked at her. "What is your name?" "Mika," she said. She sat on a nearby stone without being invited, which he found he did not mind at all. "I came to this camp 3 months ago. My husband died in the winter. Lamelk's sister is my cousin." She said it plainly, without asking for sympathy, the way people who have already processed their grief tend to speak of it. "I am sorry about your husband," Lakota said. "I am sorry about all the things you carry," she said. That stopped him. He looked at her more carefully. Most people who spoke to him said careful things, respectful things, things shaped around the fact of his position. This woman had simply said a true thing, the way you would say it to a friend. "You watched this morning," he said. "When I rode out." "Yes," she said. "What did you think?" She was quiet for a moment, looking at the river. "I thought that you were either going to come back with that girl or not come back at all, and that you had already made peace with both outcomes before you left." She paused. "I thought that was the loneliest kind of courage." Lakota held the bowl in both hands and looked at the river too. Something moved in his chest that had not moved in a very long time, a loosening, like ice beginning to shift in early spring. He did not know what to say, so he said nothing. But he did not want her to leave. She didn't. They sat beside the river for a long time as the afternoon light turned golden and the water moved past them without stopping, the way time does, carrying everything forward whether we are ready or not. 3 days after Lakota returned with Ren, word came from the north. The regiment had moved. Not south toward the Lakota camp, as everyone had feared, but east, deeper into the territory, following orders that had apparently arrived by courier from the fort. The immediate danger had passed. The camp breathed again. Children played near the teepees in the evenings, and the fires burned a little warmer, and Lamelk's voice, which had been cracked and hollow since his wife's death, began slowly to return to something like its former strength. But peace, as Lakota had learned, had a short memory. And trouble had a long one. On the 4th morning, the Elder Council called a meeting. Lakota arrived to find 9 men seated in a circle inside the large council teepee, their faces arranged in the particular configuration he had come to recognize over 6 years, the one that meant a decision had already been made before he walked in, and his role in this meeting was to be told what it was. He sat down and waited. Red Cloud, the eldest of the council and a man of 70 winters who had lived through more history than most people could name, spoke first. "You rode alone into the soldiers' camp," he said. It was not a question, but it had the weight of one. "Yes," Lakota said. "You returned the girl without violence." "Yes. And in doing so," Red Cloud continued, his voice careful and measured, "you showed the soldiers that we will accept what they do without consequence. You showed them that a Lakota chief will ride alone to beg for what they take from us." Lakota felt the words land with the precision of an arrow finding its mark. He understood what Red Cloud was doing. He was not attacking him out of malice. He was speaking the argument that half the camp had been making quietly in the 3 days since his return. The argument that mercy, in a world that did not reward it, was indistinguishable from weakness. "I showed them," Lakota said, "that we have a leader who values the lives of our people over his own pride." He looked around the circle. Lamelk's daughter is home. The regiment moved east. No one in this camp is dead. He let that fact sit in the air between them. "Tell me what weakness produced those results." One of the younger council members, a warrior named Stone Bear, who had never quite forgiven Lakota for being chosen chief over him, leaned forward. "And the next time," he said, "when they come again, and they will come again, will you ride alone into their camp with your cedar and your careful words? And the time after that? Are we to trade our dignity for survival until we have neither?" It was a real question, and Lakota knew it. He did not dismiss it. He sat with it for a moment, honestly, the way he sat with every hard thing, without flinching, without pretending it was smaller than it was. "We are 200 people," Lakota said. "The regiment is 400 soldiers with rifles that can fire 6 rounds before a warrior can notch a second arrow. If we ride to war, we will fight magnificently. We will take many of them with us. And then we will be gone." He looked at Stone Bear. "Our children will be gone. This river, these hills, this land that our grandmothers named, all of it will belong to men who will not even remember our names correctly." The teepee was very quiet. "I do not choose mercy because I am not angry," Lakota continued. "I choose it because I am responsible. There is a difference." He looked at Red Cloud. "I will not stop finding ways to protect this people that do not require us to spend them. That is my answer for the next time, and the time after that." Red Cloud was quiet for a long time. His old eyes moved around the circle, reading each face. Then he looked back at Lakota with an expression that was impossible to name, part pride, part sorrow, part something that lived between admiration and grief, the way elders sometimes look at the young men who carry the weight they can no longer lift themselves. "Then lead," Red Cloud said simply. Lakota walked out of the council teepee into the afternoon light. Mika was standing near the river, 30 yards away, watching him. He did not know how long she had been there. She did not say anything, she simply met his eyes across the distance, and nodded once, and turned back to the water. That small gesture, that quiet acknowledgement, reached him in a place that no council's approval ever could. He walked toward her. He asked her to walk with him that evening. It was a simple request, said plainly, without ceremony, just 2 words placed in front of her like an open hand. She looked at him for a moment with those clear, careful eyes, and then she said yes, and they walked along the river as the sun dropped behind the western ridge and the sky above them turned the colors of fire and copper and the particular deep orange that exists only in that last quarter hour before true dark. They did not talk about the council. They did not talk about the soldiers or the regiment or the long and difficult history that sat between their people and the spreading world of forts and treaties and broken promises. They talked about smaller things. He asked her where she grew up, and she described a camp near a bend in a different river, 3 days' ride east, where the bluebell flowers came in so thick every spring that the whole valley looked like it had been covered with a purple sky. She asked him what he had wanted to be as a boy, before the weight of leadership had found him. He told her that he had wanted to be a maker of things, not weapons, but objects, useful quiet objects. Bowls. Tools. Things that lasted. She laughed softly at that. "A chief who wanted to make bowls," she said. "The world has enough warriors," he said. "It does not always have enough people who make things that hold what is good and keep it from spilling." She was quiet for a moment after that, and he could tell she was turning the idea over in her mind the way she turned everything over, carefully, with respect for its weight. "That is what you have been doing," she said finally. "All along. That is what you did 3 days ago. You were making something that could hold the peace long enough for it to survive." He stopped walking. They were standing near a bend in the river where a large, pale boulder jutted out over the water and the sound of the current was just loud enough to make the world feel private. He turned to face her. "I have been alone in this work for a long time," he said. He did not say it to generate sympathy. He said it because it was true, and because she was the first person in years who had made him feel that honesty was safe. She looked up at him. The last light was behind her. "You are not alone now," she said. They stood there at the river's edge as the dark came in around them, and he reached out and took her hand, and she let him, and that was how it began, not with grand declarations or dramatic ceremony, but with 2 people standing at a river, choosing each other in the quiet way that real things begin. Weeks passed. Then months. The regiment did not return. Other troubles came, they always did, but Lakota moved through each of them with the same steady deliberateness, always looking for the version of events that did not require his people to spend themselves. And beside him now, more often than not, was Mika, at the river, at the edge of the council meetings, in the evenings when the camp fire burned low and he needed to think aloud and have someone listen who would push back when he was wrong and sit quietly when he needed silence. She was not a woman who agreed with him for the sake of peace between them. She was better than that. She challenged him and grounded him and occasionally told him, with her characteristic directness, that he was being an idiot, and she was usually right. The camp noticed. The camp always notices these things. There was no announcement, no formal ceremony for weeks. There did not need to be. The way 2 people move around each other tells the whole story without a single word. Lame Elk came to Lakota one morning, 3 months after his daughter had come home. He stood in front of the chief with the same stone-faced intensity he had worn the night he asked for 10 men and blood. But his eyes were different now. There was something behind them that had not been there before, something that had slowly, painfully, been rebuilt out of grief and time and the particular strength that comes from choosing to continue. You gave me back my daughter, Lamelk said. I have been thinking about how to repay that. I cannot repay it. So instead I will say only this. He paused. Mika is a good woman. She is strong and she is honest and she does not suffer fools. A brief, rare flicker of something like humor crossed his face. She will not make your life easy. Lakota smiled. Good, he said. Lamelk nodded once. He turned to go, then stopped. Lakota. He did not turn back around. He spoke to the middle distance, to the hills and the river and the morning air. You chose mercy when no one would have blamed you for choosing otherwise. That is the hardest choice a man can make. A long pause. It was the right one. He walked away before Lakota could answer. Which was fine. Some things do not need an answer. Some things only need to be said, placed into the world like a stone into a river, where the current will carry them forward and they will rest, eventually, on a riverbed that time will not disturb. Lakota married Mika at the first snowfall of that winter, when the whole valley was white and silent and the world felt, for once, like it was holding its breath in something other than fear. It felt, for once, like wonder. And years later, when people asked him what had changed on that morning, the morning he rode alone into the soldiers' camp with cedar in his hand and his rifle left behind, he always gave the same answer. He said that nothing had changed, because he had already known, long before that morning, that the only things truly worth building were the things that lasted. That violence burned fast and bright and left nothing behind but ash. That mercy was slower and harder and cost more in the short term, but it was the only material strong enough to build something you could actually live inside. He had chosen it once, alone, on a morning that tasted like the edge of a knife. And from that single choice, without planning it, without expecting it, he had built everything. A daughter returned to her father. A people still standing on their land. A woman beside him at the river. A life that was his own.